Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to today's webinar, Effectively Responding to Incidents of School Violence. On behalf of the United States Department of Education, we are so pleased to have you with us here today to discuss this important topic. In fact, over 900 people have registered for this event from every state in the U.S., several of our U.S. territories, and a few other countries. We know that a lot of people will be logging on shortly. This webinar is part of our Lessons from the Field webinar series, which highlights effective tools and techniques and strategies employed by everyday practitioners to address those hot topics that are on your minds. You can access the recorded versions of the webinars and from all the webinars in this series, as well as the mini-series webinars on the webpage now being shared in chat. Our work is stronger when we all work together and share those strategies that are effective with our students. Please note that the content of this presentation does not necessarily represent the policy or views of the United States Department of Education, nor does it imply endorsement by the U.S. Department of Education. My name is Cindy Caraway Wilson, and I'm a training specialist with the National Center on Safe Supportive Learning Environments, or NSLE. I will be the moderator for today's event. NSLE is funded by the Office of Safe and Supportive Schools within the Office of Elementary and Secondary Education at the U.S. Department of Education. To learn a little bit more about NSLE, we invite you to visit our website. On the right, you can see a copy of our homepage, and on the left, we have several different resources that we offer. We also share the latest resources and events coming out of the field via social media, so please follow us on your social media platforms. Please note the webinar is being recorded, and all materials you see today, including the slides, referenced resources, and the recorded version of this webinar will be available on the event webpage within this website. And in fact, as I mentioned during our time when we opened the room, many resources, including those slides and speaker bios, have already been posted. So we invite you to go to the website, to the event webpage, and download those slides now. Please also note that you can access previous Lessons from the Field's webinars also on that page, which is being posted. We also want to express our great appreciation for the partnership we have with the REMS TA Center. The U.S. Department of Education Office of Safe and Supportive Schools administers the Readiness and Emergency Management for Schools Technical Assistance Center, or the REMS TA Center, to help build the preparedness capacity, including prevention, protection, mitigation, response, and recovery efforts of schools, districts, and institutions of higher education with their community partners at the local, state, and federal levels. The REMS TA centers offer free technical assistance, asynchronous and synchronous trainings, publications, and guidance documents, as well as topic-specific resources and interactive tools. They are all designed to support schools, school districts, and institutes of higher education in their efforts to collaborate with community partners as they work to develop and maintain high-quality emergency operations plans. Please visit their website at rems.ed.gov and follow them on social media at REMS TA Center to get up-to-date information on the resources, trainings, tools, and other things that they develop and release to the field. Now I'd like to review our agenda for the day. Our agenda is beginning with our logistics, and we'll soon move into the welcome, which I'll introduce in just a moment. After the welcome, we will have a context-setting presentation so we understand the importance and the science behind the idea of having an effective response to school violence. Then we'll move into our panel discussion, close out the formal delivery of content, and then jump right into our live Q&A. So please do remember to use the Q&A button in your Zoom control panel to ask your questions for that segment of the webinar. Now, it's my great pleasure to introduce Mr. Gregory Jackson, the Deputy Director of the Office of Gun Violence Prevention and a Special Assistant to the President at the White House, who will provide our welcome today. Mr. Jackson.
All right. Thank you, Cindy, and thank you to the Department of Education for their critical work in this area. Before I introduce today's webinar, I want to share a bit about the work of our office. Last September, exactly 229 days ago, President Biden announced the establishment of the first ever White House Office of Gun Violence Prevention, charged with reducing gun violence, implementing life-saving policies, and expanding upon the key executive and legislative actions this administration has taken. Our new office is overseen by Vice President Harris, directed by Stephanie Feldman, and I'm proud to serve as the Deputy Director alongside Rob Wilcox. Last month, we formally created a new cross-agency gun violence emergency response team and protocol for responding to mass shootings and surges in community violence across the country. And just like schools have emergency preparedness plans, the president knew that we need to do a better job at preparing at the federal level and to have our resources prepared and coordinated to deploy before tragedy strikes. Sadly, on March 23rd, the vice president and our team walked the halls of Marjory Stoneman Douglas in Parkland, Florida, alongside the families who suffered that tragic loss and the courageous survivors from that day. And I'll be honest, it was one of the most horrendous and terrifying things that I've ever been a part of or witnessed. And I wasn't there that day when tragedy struck. But what was so clear is that there's so more we can do to proactively equip our school leaders and officials for those moments. And there's so much more resources and expertise that we can bring to the table to help prevent or at least respond to these moments as fast as possible. So this is huge. And so on behalf of the White House Office of Gun Violence Prevention, I'm just pleased to welcome you to the U.S. Department of Education's latest Lessons from the Field webinar, Effectively Responding to Incidents of School Violence. This is the third webinar in the Preventing and Addressing School Violence mini-series, a mini-series focused on sharing evidence-based and promising practices to prevent, prepare, respond, and recover from incidents of school violence. And we know to promote school safety, we need to ensure that all schools are safe, positive, supportive learning environments where students feel a sense of belonging and receive the support that they need to fully engage in school every step of the way. And although we can't prevent every incident of violence from happening in our schools and surrounding communities, it's critical that we focus on prevention efforts, creating safe school climates, but also responding to these emergencies as effectively as possible. That's why the Biden-Harris administration has made the largest investment in American history in school-based and youth mental health, adding an additional 14,000 school-based mental health professionals to our public school system. And we'll continue to proactively move forward efforts around safe storage, investing in community violence intervention, victim services, as well as protecting guns from getting into the hands of those who are most vulnerable. But when incidents of violence do happen, school staff and students need to understand the safety procedures, and the adults in the school must understand their role in effectively implementing emergency plans, both during and immediately following the incident. So in this webinar, our speakers will share a variety of trauma-informed strategies and approaches for responding to school violence, including gun violence. You will hear first from Dr. Kira Mossa, who will provide a brief context-setting presentation sharing trauma-informed practices for responding to school violence. Then you'll hear from 5 panelists to discuss their role in implementing these strategies to respond to these tragedies and share the lessons that they've personally learned. And as we proceed with today's webinar, we know you will hear valuable information and strategies that you will be able to use in your schools and in your districts. And so I thank you again for joining us today, for your efforts, for your time, but most importantly, for your commitment to creating a safe environment and really pouring into our young leaders of tomorrow. Finally, I just want to personally thank you. I'm a survivor of gun violence. I was unfortunately shot in April of 2013. And after that moment, I did my best to pour into my local youth in my community and actually mentored a group of young boys. And of those 27 youth, unfortunately, since 2013, 5 of them have been taken from gun violence and violence. And so I know that what you're doing is hard. I know that many of you may have already been impacted by this tragedy of violence in our country. But I want to thank you for your bravery, for your commitment, and for your leadership. And assure you that the president and vice president are behind you every step of the way. So with that said, I'll pass it back to Cindy, and thank you, and good luck with today.
Mr. Jackson, thank you so much for all the work you and the whole group is doing to ensure that our schools are prepared to prevent and address violence. And also thank you for your courageous sharing of your personal experience with gun violence. We appreciate all of that effort, and we appreciate you being here to guide us as well. Now it's my pleasure to go ahead and introduce our context setting speaker. Please welcome Dr. Kara Mosseth, a teaching professor at Seattle University, affiliate faculty at the SMART Center at the University of Washington, and director of disaster response consulting. Kara?
Thank you very much. Hi, everyone. Good afternoon. Thank you for this opportunity to have a chance to speak with you today. I'm just going to try and jump in and share, share some ideas about best practices when it comes to gun violence response, critical incident management from a K-12 educational perspective. So I wanted to emphasize right at the beginning that none of these pieces of this webinar series and none of these aspects of response occur in a bubble. And what you do in response to any aspect of violence or critical incident is heavily influenced by the level of preparation that's done ahead of time, the prevention mechanisms and activities that are brought to bear ahead of time, and then also sort of the general picture of the recovery plan and the goals for future recovery that you're aiming towards. So response doesn't occur in a bubble. It is influenced strongly by all of those things, and the way that it goes and the options that you have during response are strongly influenced by the degree and amount of preparation that's done ahead of time. So I'm hoping that there will be some takeaways here that can streamline some of those processes depending on where you are with preparation and what kind of conversations that you've been part of at a district level or at a broader community level, law enforcement level, et cetera. I wanted to try and synthesize some of the best practices around sort of this context of high-level takeaways that I know our panel is going to get into a lot of details on in a minute. And I created this acronym ACT about acting with intention in response to gun violence. So this is a constant circle. There's no point at which the assessment is done and you just don't go back to it. It's about assessing and communicating and tailoring your response consistently, and then going back to assessment and continuing to communicate and then tailoring again. So there's no point at which any of these pieces are just done and you move on. It's an ongoing process, and I really want to emphasize the fluid nature and the need for adaptability and sort of flexibility, nimble responding, really regardless of the size of incident that you're faced with. It's really important to adapt your approach based on the framework of the preparation that you have in place, as well as the goals for long-term recovery. So the first piece here is to assess, and this is about scale of impact. This is about the priorities that need to be emphasized when it comes to the community at large, the faculty, the staff, the number of students that are involved, and then also sort of comparing that and working that in consideration of the resources that are available at the time. One of the biggest issues that happens in response is the clarity around awareness of who are the parties that are responsible in each role. So is your response plan current? Now, I know there are a lot of guidelines and a lot of rules federally, state-wise around having a critical incidents response plan, but there's a huge difference between having a plan and actually being familiar with it, getting it off the shelf, dusting it off, and looking at what's in it and really becoming familiar and practicing with the protocol for how we would actually do this if and when. So it needs to be updated regularly. It's not something that can really afford to be sitting on a shelf. And, prior to an incident of any kind, sort of get that down and work with a team on it, or immediately after, in the event of an incident, it needs to be, might need to be cleaned up a little bit. So one of my recommendations for good response is to assess the viability of your plan, think about the scalability issues, depending on whether this is a smaller incident that involves fewer people, or whether this is a larger community, neighborhood, or school-wide incident. So the impact and the scale is absolutely going to determine the resources that you're going to need to assess and the way that you're going to need to adjust your response plan accordingly. The second piece, the second piece of the ACT model here is about communicating, and you're going to hear a lot about communication today. Like most of the things that we do, communication is probably one of the most challenging and also the most influential and consequential pieces of emergency response work that there is. It is fundamentally important. Communication needs to be broken down to various groups because different groups have different priorities. So it needs to be, you need to consider as you're working through a response plan, communication to staff and faculty and students, what that might look like. And then also communication to parents and the specific concerns that they may have or the needs that need to be addressed, as well as to the community at large, who is, in my experience, frequently wanting to help and wanting to find some way to kind of wrap around and provide support, but they might not have direction around that. And then also to the media. So this is about a communications plan that's broken down very specifically and strategically based on recovery goals that informs priorities around what to emphasize for each one of these groups based on their perspectives and their experiences and their priorities too. So it needs to be ideally separate for each group, but also the individual pieces of the communication plan need to be consistent within itself. So you're not offering two completely separate or opposing messages to staff and students as you are with parents. They are consistent with each other, but they're tailored. And that brings us to the final piece in ACT, which is tailoring the response. So I'm going to come back to tailoring in a minute, but I'm going to break down communication over the next couple minutes, just in a few different ways. So this is the who, what, where, when, why, and how. The key features of effective response communication involve who is responsible for what. So one of the issues that I've run into in my work in response is whether it's a small, more rural district with fewer people, or whether it's a large scale city district that's multiple schools in a larger geographic space. It's sometimes very unclear who is the point person for various aspects of the communication. So for example, one thing that always comes up is who is the person that's responsible for coordinating volunteers. People do tend to come out of the woodwork when there's a disaster or when there's a critical incident or an incident of violence, and they want to help, they want to support. And it's really important, again, regardless of the size of the district, that you have a key point person that's been identified as being the volunteer coordinator. In a larger district, if you have the opportunity to do so, it's helpful to have some redundancy there so that it's not just one person. It might be a partnership of two, that the first person has backup. So you have a primary person that's been identified as a volunteer coordinator, and then you have a backup person in that role so that that primary person is able to take a break, to step back and sort of also include their own recovery as they're doing response work too. Who is the person that's responsible for coordinating professional services? Oftentimes in my experience, what we've run into is that there's one person at this particular school, and then there's someone else at the district level, and both people are working on coordination, but there's more siloing. And it really cuts down on the effectiveness of the impact when it comes to coordination, because it's not entirely clear where each role stops and starts, which is something ideally that can be identified in the plan, in the preparation plan that you do ahead of time. So you want to be sure that you have individual names, specific emails, and phone numbers associated with each of the communication roles that you need, again, depending on the size of the incident or the size of the district and what the resources are that are available. Don't be afraid to get detailed and then adapt it and adjust it as you need to as things change and people kind of come and go. The next piece of the communication plan is what are the resources that are available for each specific audience or group in need. So you might want to think about offering a particular type of behavioral health support for students in the context of a safe room or a safe space in the school when it resumes, or even in the community that's outside of the school where people can meet. One of the things that our team has done in response to this is create a Zoom link that was staffed from, say, 9 a.m. until 6 p.m. with professional trained disaster response volunteers. And we took 2 to 3 hour shifts, and we created a community link, basically, where parents and community members could log on to the Zoom and speak to someone if they so choose. So there are lots of different options for the types of resources that might be helpful in a situation like this. But it is encouraged when you're kind of considering what your response plan looks like to break it down in terms of options that might work. And then when you do need to implement, you have them right there, and you can easily sort of pick and choose based on the scale of the need that you have. And again, what those resources are that are available, because sometimes something might be available at one part of the year and it might not be in terms of a professional resource or a community resource later on in the year. Also asking in the communication plan, what the asks are of the community, district, or other officials. So in many cases in response, the school district or even the building itself is being asked by people, how can we help? And so it's very helpful in your response plan to kind of think ahead about what are the things that you anticipate needing from other people outside of your building and outside of your district. What are the asks that you can make from officials to garner the support that you anticipate needing, just to have it ready, right? That preparation really does inform an efficient response. And then last but certainly not least, what is available in the languages that are needed within your community? One of the biggest gaps in effective crisis response work is translated materials that are accessible, that prevent barriers from being there for people having the access to the support that they need in a language and in a culturally appropriate way that they can identify with, and they can also seek the support that's really relevant for them. I can't tell you the number of times I've worked with school districts where a huge portion of the families in their district don't have English as a first language necessarily, but their emergency coordination plan about where to evacuate to or where parents can meet students at a reunification center is only available in English. So there's a lot of pre-planning that can be done to address this need in response that's really going to increase access for families across the board. The other thing I want to emphasize for any leaders in the group on the webinar today is that it's really okay to communicate what you don't yet know. There's a little bit of a myth around holding it close to the vest when you don't have the answers and you don't have all the answers to something, to just either just sort of hedge around it a little bit and not be clear on, I don't have the answer to that. It actually is really appropriate and it's okay to say that you don't know. Being honest and sort of straightforward about where you are in the process and what you are still continuing to assess and evaluate, and communicating that openly is a helpful thing in terms of establishing and reestablishing and continuing to grow trust with the community, between the school and the community. This might seem obvious, but you may be surprised about the number of resources that are often available that no one knows how to access because they don't know where they are and when they're available, right? So one of the things that our team has run into is that, like I mentioned, the Zoom link, there was a flyer that went out in this particular response, and the Zoom link information was provided, but what wasn't included on the flyer were the days of the week and the timeframes that the Zoom link was available. So most people in reading it interpreted it as being for an hour or two, like as a presentation, and they didn't understand that the link would be available for most of the day for about a 7-day period, and you could hop on at any time that was convenient for you. So a little bit of redundancy in communication and just really making sure that the specific locations of things, whether those are physical resources that people might need in terms of food or shelter or safety, or also behavioral health support resources, online, telephone, can they go to somewhere physical in the building space? And then for how long? And even if you don't have all the answers to those end dates, you want to share as much as you can. You can say this will be provided for X number of days and it will be reevaluated. That's part of that ongoing assessment cycle towards the end of that time. We'll see how long it goes. And you just sort of make that clear. You want to communicate the why to all of these different groups too. You want to acknowledge the challenges. You want to communicate why you're doing what it is that you're doing, and the way that your response plan is cohesive with your preparation and your long-term recovery goals. You really want to acknowledge that behavioral health triage is essential in early response. You really want to encourage families to get the support that they need in those early days, because there's a lot that we can do to mitigate risk for long-term psychological and psychiatric sequelae when families get that triage support for behavioral health in the early hours and days. And then also really acknowledging that there are lots of different coping mechanisms and culturally informed supports that are very helpful for people. And it's not one size fits all, not by any means. The final piece of the communication is the how. How your actions in the first 2 weeks are aligned with your longer term recovery goals, so that you're able to clearly identify sort of the bigger system, the bigger goals around wellness that your response plan is connected to. This doesn't come up as often as some of the others, but it certainly can. so that it's one that I did not want to leave out today. Okay, the last piece of the act, acting with intention and response, is to tailor your response. I just mentioned this, but it's worth a repeat. One size does not fit all. There needs to be different options for different groups over different timeframes, and it's hard. This is what makes it hard, because it would be easy to just do one thing and call it good. I think that many of us throughout the COVID pandemic experienced some degree of challenges when it came to either nuanced or lack of nuanced sort of response options. One of the things that happened here in the Pacific Northwest was in the early days, not knowing about the virus and things, outdoor activities were limited as they were in many places. And then once more information became available, rules and restrictions and things were changed to facilitate outdoor activities. That's an example of, I think, the direction that we need to be going in terms of some of the nuance. So you don't want to require people to participate in anything. There's some research here that I'm including at the end of my talk around not requiring people to participate in debriefing, which is CISM. There's research to provide evidence to the extent that CISM can be harmful for people. It can be very re-traumatizing, and it is moderately effective. And so it's not a recommendation, at least that I'm making today, that you require people to participate in debriefing. However, it is helpful to give people the option to participate in sharing their experience in a number of different ways. Nuance is probably one of the most challenging pieces of effective response, but it is one of the most important. I have the picture here about the shirts because one of the questions that I've been given is, should we all wear shirts of the same color on the first day back that say so-and-so strong, right? Like, this is us, we're in unity. You can have shirts for sure, but you can't require people to wear them. You shouldn't, people aren't going to be in the same psychological space, right? You don't want to be requiring people to participate in their own recovery process on someone else's time frame and scale. So that's part of the nuance. And that's also part of the trauma-informed approach, is really sort of being aware of meeting people where they are, and facilitating options that might represent certain needs that are more acute than others, but not sort of putting everybody into one spot. So again, challenging, but very important. Two last pieces for you. Really helpful to increase your understanding of what happens to the body and to the brain for all humans after disasters and critical incidents. Resilience is not a philosophical construct, right? We can measure it, we can operationalize it, we can grow it and intentionally increase it with all the families and with the communities that we're working in and part of. Most people are distressed immediately after a disaster. It's totally normal. It's common to have some pretty acute psychological symptoms and reactions in crisis. Most people also recover. So expressed distress, particularly for kids, is not predictive of future diagnosis. What they were exposed to is. So when you're doing your assessment, it's really important to collect data around the number of kids that were immediately affected, who saw things that were immediately threatening to them, who was engaged in that environment, because those types of exposures predict risk rather than reactions. Because you can have a kid that goes numb and doesn't show you a lot in terms of symptoms, but they are still struggling with the same kinds of exposures that another kid who might be very actively expressing themselves would be. And the last piece for other takeaways in my final minute here, you want to plan and prepare based on impact, not probability. That's one of the hardest things for emergency management to sort of wrap around. Plan and prepare based on impact, not probability. It's a tough one, but it's important. Clearly have defined roles and backup roles. Those are game changers when you really need them. When the chips are down, you need to know, who's doing what, and then who someone is that can back them up. Please don't underestimate the power of leadership modeling. If you are in a leadership position, what you do is more important than what you're telling people to do. Basically, human beings tend to do what we are shown and not what we're told. I had the privilege of working with a superintendent who in a crisis response raised her hand in front of the room of all of her principals and assistant principals and said, I am going to make a promise to not look at my email after 8 o'clock at night. And she did get a couple eye rolls when she did that, right, in this response. But the modeling there, she was like, I want you to hold me to it. I want to show you that I'm serious about trying to take care of myself so that we can be there for each other in the long haul. Don't underestimate that power of that modeling. And then finally, behavioral health is just a critical component of this. It's not an addendum. It's not an add-on. We need to include it in all of our planning. I think that's it for me. I will share with you some resources that are available in the handouts and pass it back. Thank you, Cindy.
All right. Well, thank you, Kira, so much for all of that information. You gave us some great strategies. I like the acronym a lot. It helps to remember those steps and the importance of that clear, transparent communication and the nuanced responses were all the takeaways that I heard there. Now I'm really excited to welcome in our panelists who are going to be turning their webcams on and joining us now. So please join me in welcoming Ms. Susan Barrett, the Technical Assistance Director at the Center on Positive Behavioral Interventions and Supports, Ms. Mari Frestelben. Sorry, Mari, I think I messed it up again. Principal at North Community High School in Minneapolis, Minnesota. Dr. Susie Mead, Chief Academic Officer at Heartland Area Education Agency in Iowa. Mr. Mark Moma, who's a school safety program manager in the Georgia Department of Education, and Dr. Casey Shahad, who is the Assistant Superintendent of Curriculum and Instruction in Chihoka School District 87 in Illinois. Welcome, everybody, and thank you all for being here to share your expertise and your experiences with us today. I'd like to begin our conversation by launching off with a question that goes out to Mark. Mark, in your experience, what are some critical actions that school personnel and students should take during a school shooting or other act of violence in a school?
Sure. So first of all, thank you for having me this afternoon and good afternoon, everyone. So from my experience, having worked in a K-12 system, also in a pediatric healthcare facility, during an active shooter event, we've always encouraged our teams to follow the state and federal response guidance, most importantly. But every situation is going to be different, and we can't underestimate the stress and the fear that's going to overwhelm everyone. So I always go back to training. Training has been paramount and at the top of my list for a very long time. We have to make sure that the training that we're providing to our staff and our teachers is being implemented during our drills. Drills can and do become routine, but they must be taken seriously. In Georgia, like many of you, we encourage tabletop exercises so that staff can talk and think through their responses. I always emphasize that debriefings, especially for exercises, are very critical so that we can actually get their follow-up and we can identify some opportunities for improvement before a situation happens. For acts of violence, every situation is going to be different. If a teacher encounters a student on student fight, we've always recommended that those staff respond in pairs, all the time really looking at the hands of those who are involved to determine if any weapons are present. Staff should also be taking note of who's involved and their ability to break them up, because last thing that we want to do is put that staff member into a situation where they may be harmed and hurt. And it goes without saying, communication, you've heard it a couple of times already today, but communication is critical to make sure that we get help immediately to the area and to the people who need it. You'll also want to consider events that are occurring outside the four walls of your school. So I recall one situation in which shots were fired in the school parking lot. That caused an immediate lockdown inside the building. So a joint investigation was quickly launched, and it resulted in a very quick arrest. But honestly, our work was only beginning with the community because school safety became a very hot topic. And so one thing I would encourage each of you to do, to really do, is your communities. So anticipate what kind of questions may be coming your way should a situation happen. We also, in the state, we often hear about challenges with parents. So think about their pre-planning. Parents who become angry towards the school for one reason or another, think about what you can do. Can those meetings be hosted virtually? Is a parent planning to visit the campus? And if they do, what are some things that you can do in order to protect yourself? Maybe moving that meeting to a conference room over an office, because an office desk can seem authoritative, but really kind of making sure to have a law enforcement officer on site during a visit can help de-escalate. So there are a couple of simple crime prevention techniques that can be employed to kind of help out anyone when it comes to school safety.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Mark, for all those ideas and different ways of responding there. Dr. Shahad, Casey, I'd like to come over to you now. You experienced an active shooter situation in your school at Central Visual Performing Arts High School when you were in St. Louis. And you told me that the shooting incident was a relatively low casualty and could have been much worse, but that some of the drills that you had done beforehand probably helped in that response. Can you tell us not so much about the drills, but about the specific actions that you and others in your schools, your staff, and even your students took to lessen the number of injuries and deaths?
Thank you, Cindy. And it's an honor to be here to represent my district, Cahokia School District, as well as the NASSP, the Principal Recovery Network. On that day, what I know we did to mitigate, casualties. Every Monday at a certain time, I have my leadership team meeting, like most school leaders, and I'm in my office with the door open. I have a staff member to come by, and it's a substitute teacher. I like to be real in tune with people. I watched her body language. She had fear in her body, and she was saying the intruder code and said that there was something going on. I immediately watched her body language. I did not question what she was saying. I immediately locked the school down. Before that, I said, who said this? And she said, the safety officer, and he was en route to the other building. So there's a safety officer in the building that I was in, and there was one in the other building. And without question, I locked the school down and called the intruder code. My role when there's an intruder drill, because all we had were drills, was to check doors, and the administrators along with the officers are in the hallways. After calling the drill, my secretary said, what's going on? I don't know. And I walked to my door, and there was the shooter at the end of the hallway with the AR-15, and he appeared to be loading the gun. I had seconds to make a decision, which was to close my door, tell my secretary to get down, push my academic coach, or warn her to get back. And within seconds, he began to shoot. Had I not called that drill, which we had performed maybe 3 weeks prior, we probably would have had a lot of students in the hallway. The other thing that happened that no one really ever questioned me about, we had a hall sweep prior to the drill. A hall sweep says you have 1 minute to get to class, and kids are running. It's a joke for them. My assistant principal has his broom, and he's walking through the hallway saying hall sweep. We called a hall sweep because after COVID, we noticed that there were so many kids after the bell, they would just kind of linger and move really slow going to class. So this was our way of being proactive. It was a nuisance just having them, being late to class. So it was the first hall sweep that we had called in 2 years. That was 10 minutes before the shooter was in the building. I'm not suggesting that schools call hall sweeps, but the drill was one that we had practiced. And those who are on the call who are administrators, when we would practice, I was Act 1, Scene 2. That means I was the lead character in the drills. I would go to the rooms knocking very hard and saying that it was me, open the door. And if a student or teacher opened the door, I would firmly tell them never to do that again, because I could be the gunman. He could have me at gunpoint. So on the day of the shooting, no one unlocked the door, and he did what an active school shooter would do, which is to pull door handles.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Right. So they were all secured in their space behind closed doors.
Yes.
Yeah. Excellent. Well, thank you so much for sharing those examples of things that you did. You're already getting some icons I see coming up the right side. We appreciate that you're willing to share all of that. I'd like to come over to you, Susie. So you were contacted the weekend after a shooting at Perry High School in Iowa. So that was in your district, and you had a very quick response, in my opinion, to their request for assistance. In your experience, can you tell us about what are some of the pros and cons of having a person from a regional center coming in, or regional agency coming in to quickly respond to a school incident?
Sure, I'll be happy to share a little bit of that. And so yeah, our situation was pretty unique. I work for an area education agency, and we provide supports to districts, but we are not the district administrators. And so at 6:30 in the morning on that Saturday after the shooting incident, I got a text from the superintendent, who originally had told me he thought he had everything covered, but did not sleep the night before and needed a lot more help. And since I had been a superintendent myself, he said, I just need somebody sitting alongside me to think through things as a superintendent would. So some of the things that I think were pros is I was able to give him relief because, as you can imagine, everybody wanted to talk to the superintendent and things were coming at him at warp speed. And he needed time to be able to process and just take his time to answer questions. I was able to tackle a lot of things from a non-emotional point of view. I didn't know the victims. I didn't know the teachers that were involved. And so I was able to use a very objective manner of dealing with the situation and incident. We were able to do a lot of coordination and work behind the scenes and prop the superintendent up and help to support him with the talking points that his community and his staff needed to hear from him. And we were able to also filter a lot of priorities because, as you can imagine, in the midst of an emergency, everybody has a lot of priorities that they want to be tackled. And so we were able to prioritize things for him and also spend a little bit more time making some decisions, just really pondering things and thinking about the pros and cons of each decision, and then, giving him some suggestions on how he might want to do it. So we were able to vet things for him, which was really helpful. Some of the cons, though, to us coming in is just as it was a pro, we didn't have relationships with people. So we weren't exactly sure who the people were that we needed to reach out for and get help and support for. So that took a little bit of time. And we didn't have a deep knowledge of the district. And so we didn't know who the important people in the community were that we would need to reach out to and garner support and help. That was one thing that we learned, is if we could have our community members doing a lot of the communication alongside our superintendent, that was super helpful because more than one person was saying the same thing, and different people connected with different folks within the community. And then the other, I think, con was we just didn't know all the resources that were available in the community. Eventually we figured it out, but we could have moved a little bit faster had we known that. So if I ever had a situation in which something like this happened, I would definitely ask for somebody to stand alongside me to help navigate it, because it is a very emotionally draining situation for any school leader.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much for all of those pointers and for being open about both the pros and the cons to the sort of outside person support perspective. Susan, I'd like to come over to you. We know that creating a nurturing, positive school environment is absolutely essential to both preventing violence and creating spaces for students to learn, but also that they can be helpful to use when you're responding to incidents of school violence. So what are some of the ways that schools may need to shift to more intentional focus on providing mental health supports, as well as that positive school environment, and restoring that sense of trust and safety? So lessons learned from the PBIS and MTSS efforts.
Yeah, thank you. It's great to be with you, and such an honor to share space with this panel here today. I just want to echo something that Dr. Malsas said in the beginning about kind of those blurred lines across prevention, response, and recovery. And underneath all of that, sort of that through line, is that culture of wellness, right? The sense of connection and belonging, and having trusted people at the ready in that preparation phase is going to be so critical as we move into the initial response and then to recovery. And I think we throw out terms like PBIS and MTSS, and I think that the big idea here is that there is an organizing framework, that a common way of work across the cascade of partners in this space. So from state to region to county to district to school, that everybody, this is a team sport, right? Nobody's doing anything by themselves, and we're all on the same page as we build communities of practice in the prevention space. So when we are responding immediately, to Susie's point, we have members who haven't been directly impacted that we can quickly pull in because we've all been on a learning journey together. So I'll give you a really quick example of that. In our work in one of the states, we have created an interconnected approach where we're breaking down silos and we're bringing teams, we're consolidating teams and consolidating partners and intentionally designing and co-designing with families and students and educators. So it's a community-wide approach. And we're, again, anchoring that work on the public health framework. So when we do our prevention work and we have multiple districts gathering together and learning together, we're building trust and connection and relationships with the adults. And then in this one region, specifically, we had 3 different districts that we built a professional learning community around. And because of that, unfortunately, each of those districts has been impacted over the course of this year, whether it was an environmental impact, ongoing community violence, or specific event. They've all been impacted over the course of this year because they've had that trust and that relationship and that common approach to how they've organized themselves. They've been able to push in when the helpers and the caregivers have been directly impacted and can't support the needs of their own community. They have other trusted adults that are really that volunteer core that can kind of push in and help. So it kind of speaks to what others have also contributed. In that same kind of systemic thinking in our design, I'll give you another example. When it comes to reunification, we know that our kids and our families are going to respond when they have those trusted adults participating in that reunification. That only works when you do have those trust and those relationships established, right? Again, moving into how important that prevention work is. And then when we've got families who aren't necessarily going to be unified or reunified with their loved ones, we can push in and increase supports for them in real time, again, because we have formed those relationships with our partner school districts. So just a couple of quick examples. We think about building that cascade and building those and designing those systems of support that are anchored to that public health logic.
Right. And then when it comes time for response, you're implementing those plans that you already, and banking on those relationships you've already established. Yes.
Exactly.
Excellent. Thank you so much. Mari, I'd like to come over to you now. So you had explained to me that your community has a ongoing kind of exposure to violence and loss through things that are going on in the community. And you talked about the importance of establishing that school climate so those students can feel seen, heard, and I love that you use the word loved, right, in their school environment. Can you tell us a bit about how does positive school climate support students and staff when there is an incident of violence or loss?
Yeah, happy to. And I would just say it's an honor to be on with all of you and trusting that everyone out there is also feeling the heaviness of this conversation. It's a big deal, right? This is not just business as usual. This isn't, when I started teaching 27 years ago, I don't remember this being in the forefront of my mind, but I do remember being a young teacher with Columbine, and I really think that our lives have changed so very, very much. And I just want to say a special thank you to Dr. Casey for your vulnerability and sharing about what you went through that day. I just can't even imagine, and thank you. I would say that for me, in my city, I'm located in, and I'm on year 17 now of being in what we call the hot zone. And so we have shot spotters in our city. And I think gun violence, just across the board, is something that we're all dealing with, regardless of what type of setting we're in, urban, rural, suburban. We're just dealing with it in a different way. But in my reality, it happens to be frequent gunfire, where my high school is right smack dab in what we call the hot zone. And so what I've learned to do over the years, especially since 2020, where the city of George Floyd, everyone knows it has been just an emotional roller coaster for the youth in our city these last 4 years. And so what we have relied very heavily on gets to kind of what Susan was talking about, which is structure, systems, predictability, and relationships. It's critically important that our students and parents feel like our school, the second that the students step onto our campus, they are in a safe space where they feel seen, valued, validated, and heard. And so I am outside every morning. I mean, unless there is something that absolutely stops me, I am outside every morning, because it means I oftentimes joke with some of my colleagues that my parent pickup and drop off looks like an elementary school with a kindergarten line, because that's how important it is to my parents that they drop their children off or walk their children to school. And so by them making eye contact with me or being able to wave good morning to me every morning, that shifts for them. That makes them feel. It can also backfire at times, I want to be honest, because people are thinking, I'm trusting my child to you, right? And so now it's all on you, and you can't control what's happening outside of the four walls of your building. But predictability, consistency, structure, and systems, we are in the same place. We are very, very careful not to have unique or different schedules on a regular basis. Monday is always Monday, Tuesday is always Tuesday, Wednesday is always Wednesday. And then the dysregulated feel that's happening sometimes out in the community begins to simmer down as the kids come in. If and when then there is a big incident, right? You've done all that pre-work, so that structure, consistency, predictability has been built in and established. Now the kids are willing to do the reactionary work with you because those relationships have been so firmly established.
Right. So you do all of that groundwork of creating the relationships, building the connections. Then when something does happen in the community, whether it's gunshots or loss of life, that those young people are willing to come forward. They're willing to talk to the folks in the school. They're willing to seek support in a supportive environment. And those are wonderful examples.
Yeah, and I would go so far as to say, Cindy, that this year we took it one step further and we gave our kids a little Google form to fill out, where we asked them where and with who do they feel most safe and most seen. And at first, some of the staff were like, I don't know. You know, what if I'm one of those persons that the kids don't feel most safe and most seen? Well, you need to know, right? You got to know that. And the ones that the kids do feel most safe and most seen, and then also, you know, which ones of your peers. And so we actually collected that data this fall so that we had it and we were able to respond to it.
Excellent. Those are wonderful examples. Thank you so very much for being open about what you're doing in your school. I'm going to come back around to Susie again. So Susie, one of the things that you had mentioned when we spoke is that and you mentioned it earlier, is this important, the importance of organizing, what a monumental task it is in a critical incident. Can you give us an overview of some of the tasks that you consider when implementing an effective response?
Yeah, sure. I'd be happy to do that. And one of the things I would say is I was given a little luxury of time. So I got that text at 6:30 in the morning on Saturday, but didn't have an appointment with the superintendent until Sunday morning. And so that gave me about 24 hours to do everything I could to figure out what resources were out there and available. And so there are 3 places that I found some really significant supports. But there is not a cookbook or a recipe that says do this first and then do this. So you have to align all of the information to your particular incident. But NASSP, which is the National Association of Secondary Principals, has some really nice resources available, as well as the National Association of School Psychologists of how to respond after a shooting incident, as well as NEA. So I spent the morning just combing through those and then trying to put together a list of the things that we should do and plan for when we got together with the district. The other thing that Casey alluded to is there is an association of which principals who have had a shooting incident at their school that is available for support for school districts. And I reached out to them, and they actually put me in connection with 2 superintendents that had shooting incidents. So I was able to call and talk to them on Saturday afternoon and just say, okay, here are the things that I think I need to help guide the district through. What am I missing? What do I need to make sure that I have? What should I not do? What lessons did you learn when you went through those? And so what I did was I organized, and it will be in your resources later, but I organized some things that we needed to make sure that we had plans for around communication. Like, who is going to be the lead communicator? How were we going to communicate? How often? How would we ensure that everybody, students, parents, community members, staff, had the right communication? We also wanted to make sure that we had bi-directional communication. So we were not always the ones that had the communication. We wanted to also get information from folks so that we knew what people were thinking, so that we could respond to that as well. The other thing that we had to plan for is how are we going to organize and manage all of the outside services and coordinate that. And so we had to identify who could have access to the district and the leaders, and who could not at this point, who were not the priorities at the time. Little things like we were getting tons of calls in regard to donations from everything from teddy bears to money to we even had the Hamburglar from McDonald's wanted to come and meet with students. And so we had to identify what was appropriate and what wasn't appropriate, and who was going to manage that and say yes or no, those sorts of things. When things settled down, we really needed to talk about reopening the schools and how we were going to support students. And there are many different levels of support. We had to have a different level of support for students who were injured in the incident. We had to have a different level of support for siblings of students that were involved with the incident. We had to have a different level of support for adults who saw what happened during the incident. And then people who had other trauma in their life that this triggered, even though maybe they weren't even on the campus at the time. And so we just had to have layers and layers of plans for all of that. One of the things that we did that we felt was really impactful was having an open house for all of our students and families. We wanted our students to walk back into the schools with their parents and their guardians, those that would support them, so that it wasn't them doing it like they were getting off the bus and having to go in by themselves. We also offered lots of opportunities for people to come for individual or private reentry into the building if they needed that, instead of with a large group of people. And then the other thing that we talked about was just how are we going to attend to the ongoing needs of students and staff. And so I kind of scrubbed the document that we put together. Obviously, it ended up, when we had all of our information added, it was like over a 40-page document. But each of the things that we did, we always assigned a lead, we always assigned kind of a deadline, and then we color coded it as if it was in progress, if it was completed, if we needed to assign it to someone else, that sort of thing. But this document was it was our roadmap as we navigated through about the 3.5 weeks before school restarted for our students.
Excellent. Thank you so much. And I remember just how much when you mentioned that open house, how that resonated with me, that need to be able to have not just the students, but their caregivers come in and just to say, can we do this? Can we come back into this school? And then seek the assistance they might need if that wasn't the case, right? If they discovered they couldn't, they had a chance to get support. So thank you so much for that. Mark, I'm going to come around to you. So engaging with and coordinating community resources is, as we've heard, is so essential to responding to these critical incidents, such as an active shooter or other incident at school. Can you please talk to us about how you engage community schools, particularly like the hospitals and other folks like that might be providing supports to the students and faculty at the school?
Yeah, absolutely. So in addition to my K-12 experience, I also had the opportunity to work in a pediatric healthcare. So we had 3 pediatric health hospitals here in Atlanta. And so I was the director of safety, security, and emergency management. And what we quickly found out is we had some unique challenges. right? Because we had patients who were coming into our doors in our emergency rooms that often didn't have any identification, no driver's license, and caregivers who were, quite frankly, difficult to locate and get in touch with. So all of this really was happening when time is of the essence. So we're trying to track down emergency information to obtain parental consent. We were looking for information about medication, known allergies, all of this information. So from a school perspective, I would encourage each of you to really reach out and learn more about the capabilities of the hospitals in your area. For instance, are they a level 1 or level 2 trauma center? Because that's going to determine, based on the injury, where they're going to be transported to. In addition, how many patients can they manage until diversion really becomes a reality? In our situations, given our volumes that we were seeing on a daily basis, we knew that we could accept anywhere from 6 to 8 patients. But what happens once we go to 10 or 12? And then we started having to look at different campuses in order to send those patients to. So in reality, you could have patients and some of your students being transported to different hospitals. Now, on the school side, when I was working in K-12, we always required an administrator to accompany the student if they had to be transported, which is certainly a great practice, but just make sure the person that is there at the hospital has remote access to your student information system. So, and just please know that you're not alone. All hospitals are required to have a very robust and comprehensive emergency management plan. So these are professionals that are commissioned and really operating under CMS guidelines. And in fact, hospitals have very specific services that they can offer you that are on site 24/7. We offered counselors, family experience liaisons, chaplains if needed. These individuals were already on site and were certainly made available to any patient who was coming in, specifically if they were from a school. So I can assure you that the hospital would really appreciate you reaching out to them to partner with them and pre-plan.
Excellent. Thank you so very much. And I think sometimes we don't think about partnering with hospitals in advance of an incident. So it's important to kind of learn about the different things that they can do and the ways they can partner. Susan, coming back over to you, how have schools leveraged the positive behavioral interventions and MTSS efforts or strategies in their initial response when a school may not yet be open or they're implementing alternative routines?
Yeah, again, I'm just going to echo something that Dr. Malseth offered us in the beginning, which is that flexibility and being able to adapt in real time. And again, all of that work and that prevention piece that we've established really clear rules and lanes. We've got kind of a process in mind. We've got an alternative path forward when we're not able to kind of come into the spaces that we want to come into so as much as we want to return to predictable, consistent routines, sometimes that isn't possible. And I want us to think back to when we were kind of in that lockdown with COVID and the ways that we had to adapt our way of work inside that virtual space and think about the things that worked. Think about the things we were able to come in and share space and connect with each other virtually, which I think surprised all of us. So the big idea is continue to stay connected, even though you're going to have to adapt and what that looks like and sounds like. If that's another designated public space that you have access to, amazing. But if it can happen virtually, if people feel much more comfortable in that virtual space and have the ability to do that, it's the big idea behind that is really staying connected and then being able to quickly identify when somebody needs access to care and access to help. We can quickly maneuver and make sure that there are multiple ways that we can communicate when somebody needs help and that we get them quickly into that care process. And then finally, in the thinking about the prevention space, who are the people that currently are struggling in your system that are automatically going to need additional supports in the event that something is happening? And not waiting on that, immediately connecting them to increased layer of support in the immediate aftermath of an event.
Right, so being aware of those students who already might be in need of tier 2 or 3. And then when an event happens, you immediately seek out those students and their families to make sure they are supported, it sounds like, right?
Okay.
Excellent. Thank you. Mari, I'd like to come back around to you. You mentioned to me that many of your students were reluctant to talk about people they didn't know after something happened in the community. And you also sort of mentioned that earlier today. How do you and your staff support your students? And also, how do you as leaders or other folks in the school support your staff to be able to do that?
Yeah, that's been an area that has been a little bit of a challenge because we have some amazing staff at the district level who are really, really good at, they're licensed, they're therapists at the city level, at the county level, and they have come out at times of crisis, and the kids, they don't recognize them, they don't know them, and they're just like, I'm good. They would almost rather keep it going and keep it moving than, go into a room or sit down with somebody. So that's been hard. And I think over the years, what I've started to think about differently, and then my leadership team as well, is what type of work do we need to do so that we can be ready and in that space. And this has been very nuanced, and it may not make sense to people, but I'll do the best that I can to keep it concise. So what we have decided to do is that we have got to continue to teach. We can't stop teaching, or we can't stop school, especially based on the type of environment that we are located in. And so what we have decided to do is that we need to do whatever work we need to do within ourselves. And so we've done a lot of work on trauma, on PTSD, on epigenetics, on how trauma shows up in your body, making sure that we as educators are in as healthy a spot as possible, that we're dealing with whatever baggage we have, right? So that when the kids are experiencing trauma, crisis, shock, grief, all those things, that we are able to show up. And this is where the teachers and the staff have to be amazing, right? Because they have to be able to show up. They have to be able to still, because some kids, what we've learned, and we've worked with some of our local experts on adolescence, youth, the brain, the childhood brain, some of them, when they are in a space of crisis or trauma, they need to do math, right? Like they need to do math. That is their coping mechanism. They do not need to circle up. They do not need to sit down with somebody. They need to do math, because that is the regulatory system that is getting their amygdala back in order. Some don't. Some need to journal. Some need to go to a room, and they do want to talk to the school social worker that they have a relationship with, or the guidance counselor that they have a relationship with. So we've created this system where the teachers, to the best of their abilities, are in that moment staying as calm and regulated as possible. We meet early in the school day if we have to. We will do calming techniques, breathing techniques if we must. We will circle up if we must, so that when those doors open, we are ready for the children. Then when they walk in, the teachers are ready to teach. Okay, they will acknowledge what has been happening or what has recently happened, but they are ready to teach, and they're ready to differentiate their instruction. And then once they lead with teaching and content, then they allow students, if they need something different in that space and at that time, they have that. They can either have something different in the classroom with a peer, or they can go to a trusted adult. Now, here's the one thing that I will not back away from. If students are unable to cope in school, they are so dysregulated, they are crying, and this happens, then that is when I will ask a family member to come and pick their kids up. Because what I've learned over the years is that when they cannot be consoled, two things can happen. And this is going to sound gross, but sometimes it's performative. Like, so, I'm just being honest. Sometimes it's performative, and they're caught up in the drama, and so you need to go, because, and sometimes it's real, and that's when you really need your mom or your dad or your grandma or your grandpa or your auntie or your uncle. But they will have a domino effect on the rest of the kids at that point in time. Okay, my time is up.
Yep, that's so absolutely. But it sounds like you're doing a lot of things before you get to that stage. There's so many different alternatives for that student to take advantage of in the school, in the classroom, in the spaces that you create for students to go to get their time to try to regain regulation or calm themselves down. So that's, yeah, so I hear you. All right, I'm going to come back over to you, Casey. When we talked, you had mentioned the Principal Recovery Network, and we've heard that from a couple of other people now, and how important that recovery network was for you, as well as the guide that they created, the Guide to Recovery, and how they were helpful. Can you please talk to the audience about how the network and that guide supported your response to the shooting, but also what you're doing now, how it's still supporting you?
Just a short timeline. May of 2022, I walked into our teacher's lounge and a teacher was crying. And I said, "What's wrong?" And she was crying about the shooting that happened in Uvalde, Texas. And I remember walking away and being quite insensitive in my thoughts, like that's way in Texas, that, that's not here. It's not like it's close to home. I was so disturbed with my initial response that I ended up researching secondary trauma, how it affects individuals. And I ended up doing a presentation in August of 2022 to my entire staff and to all of the principals in our district around secondary trauma, vicarious trauma, how it shows up. And I referenced the shooting in Uvalde. So I done research around school shootings in August and presented. In October, when the school shooting happened at a school, which is my alma mater, and I claimed us to be the best school in St. Louis, still do, where I was proud to lead there and give it my best effort and wanted to lead just like my principal did. So it was a personal mission for me. When the shooting happened at a school, maybe we averaged 1 to 2 fights a year, and that's a big deal for an urban school district where we have students that come from all over. So when the shooting happened, it was beyond my imagination, and it was unprecedented in the district, in my school, and even in the region. So from elected officials to our superintendent, who was retiring at the end of December. This happened the end of October. So we were there was going to be a changing of the guard. So there was a lot of moving parts. The day of the shooting, I received a ton of emails as I left after identifying the body of the student who was killed, after praying with the families and being just a lot of trauma to myself individually. And I remember checking my email, and I got an email from Ty Thompson. He was the former principal of Marjory Stoneman Douglas. And it said, "I know you had a school shooting," or something to that effect. "Here's a guide." And I clicked off of it and I thought, this is a prank. Someone knows that we've had the school shooting and they're pranking. Well, I received 2 more emails from different members of the Principal Recovery Network, who are principals who were current or formal of a violent situation, particularly school shootings. And I decided to open up the communication because they wouldn't stop. And I opened it up and I read it, and there's a Principal Recovery Guide. This guide, when you open it, it's a 14-page document. It says do not use it step by step. Casey uses step by step, okay? Because I didn't know what to do and where to turn. But the first thing that I remember reading is that there's no timeline for recovery. And I was looking for, how do I get beyond this? And how do I go back to whatever I thought was normal? And that wasn't even possible. But I began to read, and it talked about how to reopen the school. And at this time, again, we're immediately out, we're virtual, and it's just a guide. So it was advice. So again, not a step by step, but just some practical, almost lessons from the field. And these were individuals, Frank DeAngelis, who's a former principal of Columbine, to Ty Thompson from Marjory Stoneman Douglas, current principal at Sandy Hooks, and my partner, who was my sister, I call her sister from another mother, Patricia Greer, out of Benton, Kentucky. I could call her and I could say, "We're getting a lot of she would tell me what's going to happen. You're going to get a ton of mail. You're going to get a ton of people reaching out to you. You're going to get, have you thought about how you want to reopen the school and what needs do you have, the students have?" And it was at that moment that I realized I needed some healing for myself. Patricia was able to talk me through that it was okay not to be okay. And I think Kira may have talked about it earlier. I became the lead communicator. Kira, I did everything wrong, by the way. I was a lead communicator and all those things, but I took a 2-month time, and I called it a pause. It was time for healing. Right after we got back into the building, and that was to take care of my own personal needs. The Principal Recovery Network has been it's a club no one wants to join. So I'm not saying you need to be a part of it, but I'm thankful for the members. They are the most selfless, courageous individuals that I have encountered. And no, our demographics are not similar. I am probably the cutest little chocolate one in the group. However, they have been a source of I would say ton of resources, a sounding board for me, a trusted ear, ally, colleague. The guide, I still use it. I reference it for individuals. We talked about it throughout this call about being prepared. I cannot stress that enough. Being prepared is the most important thing. But in this guide, one of the things that kept me focused on what do I prioritize? And that was one of the last points. And it said, listen to the voice of the students. Well, we took pride in our continuous motto being the power of being seen, where students felt valued, seen, and heard. So listen to the voices of the students is where I diverted my energy. It happened on October the 24th. On November the 5th, the students rallied together to have a whole outdoor event that they organized. I kept my fingers crossed because we didn't have the energy, momentum, or wherewithal to even keep up with them. But they decided to, put a theme, we are family undivided. Although this tragedy happened, it will not define who we are as a community. So we allow the students to be leaders. And that came directly from that guide. There's a ton of resources out there, but I have yet to really see that be voiced in a way that it was voiced there. And again, not a ton of words, because in the midst of a crisis, you don't have time to read a whole manual. So I think the guide in itself was a gift, the network of individuals, and we are advocates. I call us advocacy champions because we're out advocating that others may not be in the situation that I was in, where they are prepared, where they are there's preparation and mitigating those circumstances, and knowing how to be fit for this work and be a lead communicator should you have to, and how to disseminate the communication to your various stakeholders. So I have, have friends for life, and I still talk to Patricia. I can call them, and calling her now because I'm advocating for a Senate bill to encourage threat assessments. And in Kentucky, they're doing that. And so again, the networking never stops. The recovery, again, there's no timeline. So we're in it to win it. And I'm not going anywhere. They're not going anywhere. And we will continue to advocate to our fellow leaders in school districts.
Yeah. And I love the fact that they were persistent, because I could totally get ignoring something that seems like a scam, but they persisted. They didn't let up until you responded in some way, which is important. And you're not the only one. Several of you have mentioned how important it was to be able to speak with somebody else who had an experience that it could somehow help you understand what was going on and provide that guidance. So thank you so much for that, again, for that vulnerability, as Mari pointed out before, and your willingness to talk about that. I'd like to pause us for a moment. We're at 4:15, so I'm going to do an official closing of the content delivery. We've got some more conversation to happen with our panelists. They're going to hang out with us for a moment, and then we're going to go and talk more about our panelists and talk about some of the questions that are in the Q&A as well. So we're going to bring those slides back up. So the first thing I'd like us to really consider here is some of the key takeaways that I think that we're hearing loud and clear here. And right at the very top is that schools are not in this alone. They cannot be in this alone, whether you're dealing with a mass casualty incident, or whether it's school violence or natural disaster or whatever, or if it's ongoing community violence or community issues that are going on, that there is a need to partner, locally, regionally, and at the state levels and federal levels as well. Coordination, though, is incredibly essential. We heard that loud and clear from everybody, that you have to be able to coordinate those resources and make sure that those critical resources are going where they're needed. Clear and organized communication that's also transparent, right? So that if you don't know timelines, you say you don't know timelines. This is what we're doing for now. So you're transparent, you're open, you're organized in that communication. And as Casey said, perhaps you're being really clear about the who's communicating, right? And maybe being able to find somebody to back up the person who might have been that primary communicator in the plan. The idea that mental and physical health supports are important for students and staff. We also heard that families are oftentimes in need of these kinds of supports as the whole community is moving towards healing, or the whole community is engaging to try to address a community-wide issue. And then finally, that state and regional infrastructure and federal also infrastructure can help to respond and provide support to folks in schools and districts. So you're not alone is the message there. So I want to, before we move too much further, I want to thank our audience for that ongoing participation that we're seeing and the icons and the responses that you're having. We've got some questions coming into the Q&A, which we're going to come to in a moment. I do want to remind folks that you can go to the websites to be able to gather these resources all the resources that people are mentioning are going to be on the event webpage. And also to remind folks, we have 2 more webinars in the upcoming webinars in the Preventing and Addressing School Violence mini-series. This month, on May 22nd, we're going to be focusing in on recovery, which is the time from when the school is coming back online and moving forward. We've heard from many of our speakers today that there is no timeline on recovery, that it's an ongoing event. So we'll be talking about how to manage that on the next webinar. And in June, on the 26th, we're hoping to highlight student voices and how students are experiencing prevention activities and other activities around addressing and preventing school violence. So those are the upcoming ones that we're going to have on the schedule. And I want to remind everybody that the feedback form is really what we use to guide our content. So please click on the link, which is going into the chat now. We will come back to the link and this feedback form after our Q&A, so that if you don't get it now, you can get it later. We definitely use the questions and comments to guide future products. Now I'd like to go ahead and go back to our panelists. We're also going to have Kira come back on with us as well. And what we'll do now is we will address some of the questions in the Q&A, and we have a few more questions also that we're going to be coming back to the panel on as well. So we've got a few questions in our Q&A. So let me pause and look over here for a moment. One of the things that somebody in the audience has asked, she mentions that her daughter just had a school shooting incident at her school, and the school had a great plan that they put in place as soon as the incident took place. And as a parent, they felt that it would be beneficial to know what to look out for students as they prepare to go back to school. Does anybody want to respond to that? What are some things that you might be looking for, or you might encourage parents to look for in their students when they're getting ready to go back to school, whether it's a large incident of school violence, like a shooting incident, or a community incident that may have unsettled a student? So what are some signs that you might need to kind of, go ahead. Yep.
Yeah. So as a clinician, I can, as a response clinician, I can definitely try to answer this one. So, I mean, all kids are so different. So as a parent or a primary caregiver, what you really are looking for is changes to baseline. Changes in baseline behavior, something that's radically different for what your child typically does. You also really want to find out, I can't emphasize really enough how much the exposure predicts risk. So it's not necessarily how they're responding to it, it's what they saw and what they witnessed, because some kids go numb, some kids kind of shut down. So the symptoms that are expressed aren't necessarily predictive of a bigger mental health issue. It's completely normal for kids to have some regression in behavior, for kids to have behavioral acting out or pulling in and sort of shutting down. It's really normal for kids to have sort of that neurological disruption where they become defensive or irritable and reactive to things. So, you know, parents and caregivers are the best experts in their own kids' norms and those baselines. And I would just really encourage people to ask questions and reach out to see if you might need some help, if you have some curiosity about it. Don't leave it. Don't leave it be if you're worried.
Okay, excellent. Thank you so much for that. And I do recall you saying that it is about what they were exposed to. So, you know, giving space for your kids to talk to you about what they experienced, so that you have an idea of that exposure level, could be helpful, I imagine.
Yeah, and it doesn't have to be emotional. It doesn't have to be how you
Right.
feel about what you saw. It's just sort of a report about what you saw. So, yeah.
The facts, right. Excellent, thank you. Did anybody else want to jump in and offer anything on that one? Okay.
Cindy, we just have a resource that kind of follows up with what Kira was offering. And so we have an agenda that we put together for considerations for returning to school. And in that agenda that we can actually share with the audience are some cool tools for both families and staff that kind of goes through some of the things that Kira outlined. So we just wanted to make sure that there was a resource that kind of went along with the answer to that question.
Excellent. And we'll make sure that that's on the event webpage for everybody, as well as send it out via chat. So do check your chats. Okay, so another question that is coming up is around the behavioral health, mental health, behavioral health follow-up. Casey, the audience is wondering if you would be comfortable in responding to any kind of follow-up that happened for your staff and students in St. Louis, or if there was anything planned.
We had what we made into a counseling center. So we had various therapists who were there. The problem was that the students were reserved when they did talk, and we were out of the building from October the 24th until January the 17th. So the in-person did not start until January. What was offered was a lot of virtual, and students did not log on. There was some physical places. Parents could not bring them because they could not take off of work. So there were plenty of students who did not receive the therapeutic support that they would have in a, I don't know what a different situation would have been, but that was not available. And again, a lot of moving parts. No one really knew what to do, but it sounds like Mira had some really good points in terms of what she's doing in terms of mental health support. I do want to say that what the staff did, we started when it was the last 5 weeks of school. We were doing 4-day work weeks, with 1 day being allowed for mental health, and that was for students and teachers, because what we did see was when we were back in the buildings, the teachers didn't have time to get the help that they needed. So while the therapists were in the building for the students, while teacher was teaching in the classroom, they didn't have that time. So I became probably my district's worst nightmare, in that I advocated for my teachers, and that this 5-day work week was not working, and they needed that time, and they allowed that. And the state was very compliant in giving, so the state and the district worked with us and gave us that time for those who needed it.
Right, so that the staff was able to take off the time on the clock, if you will, and get the support that they needed, so that they could continue to teach and engage with students. Excellent.
Correct.
Does anybody have anything else that you might want to add to that?
I would add a couple. Yep, I'll add a couple of things. One of the things that we offered the school district is we had a pool of substitutes available, so we could tap in and tap out for the teachers. So not only, there were also places where students could go to talk to somebody, and we kept track of the ones that were there often, and then would make phone calls to parents saying, your child is accessing this extra support quite often. We think maybe we might want to look to a different level of support for them going forward. The other thing that was shared with us from a superintendent in Texas was if people offer to bring in therapy dogs, say yes. And she shared that, she had a 250-pound defensive lineman that was on the floor with this big dog, and she said that just truly calmed kids and adults as well. And so to this day, Perry still has a dog in each of their buildings, and probably will going forward.
That's excellent. As a dog person myself, I know how lovely they can be and how supportive they can be, but particularly when they're trained. So you get those support dogs who are specifically trained to engage in certain behaviors around people who are in crisis. Thank you so much. Anybody else want to add to that? Okay, I'd like to come back to a question that we talked about potentially for the panel, and these are going to go to Mari and Susan, and then I'm going to come back to Mark if we have time. And anybody can also contribute here. So we often hear that schools can't make a difference when communities are plagued by violence. How do you respond to that, Mari?
I would just say that's absolutely not true, and I have the proof to prove it. Our alumni come back every year, and they do alumni panels with we've separated out sometimes staff and students so that staff can get a little bit more in-depth, detailed, and vulnerable with the kids. But every single year it is consistent. This is my 5th year here in this building. And so I've seen it every year. Every year it is consistent, where they said that their school experience at North Community High School in Minneapolis, Minnesota was a significant contributing factor to their mental and emotional well-being. And so I completely disagree with that assessment.
Yes.
You have to be very clear about what your locus of control is, because if you think that you can control everything inside and outside of your school, you're going to drive yourself crazy. But you can make a huge difference in the lives of children that don't have exit ramps on some of the highways that some of the rest of us might have.
Excellent. I knew you would disagree with that, by the way. That's why I wanted to ask you. Thank you so much. And Susan, do you want to jump in on that as well? Because I know that you're going to have a response.
Yeah, absolutely. I couldn't agree more with Mari's response, right? I mean, when we focus on care, connection, belonging, not just for students, but with all the adults and all the members of the community, and we really empower youth and families and communities to work with schools. Schools are the hub of the community. They're the wellness hub of the community. And I just want to caution us to not think that we have to do really flashy, big, expensive things, that the magic is in the micro moments, and the people in the community have the answers. And it's about us honing in on those really specific skills around active listening, pressing pause, giving permit, having people ask for help. Those are the things that our communities can rally around. And it seems really simple, but we're hardwired to from a biological perspective to connect with one another. And if we can just create spaces where we can do that on a regular basis, then they will be not only spaces of wellness, but spaces of healing as well.
Yeah, thank you so much. And thanks for pointing out the difference between feeling the need to do a big flashy thing or doing these everyday moments of connection and kindness and empathy. I think sometimes those big flashy things can be suspect. You get those eye rolls happening. And somebody mentioned that there are eye rolls happening at one intervention. But being able to say that this happens every day in my school, my principal is at the door every day in the school, or I can talk to my peers about things that are important to me every day. Those are the things that are really making people lean in for sure. Does anybody else want to respond to that before we close out? So when you hear messages that violence is inevitable, that there's nothing we can do. It's all been said then, I think, right?
Well, I guess, Cindy, I would say none of us believe that, or we wouldn't be here today. There's always
Totally would
something we
not
can
be
do.
here. Absolutely, absolutely.
Can I chime
Go
in,
ahead.
Cindy?
Please
The work
do.
I call the work heart work. So it is a pull and a tug of the heart. And so yes, it's not if, it's just when that thing or something will occur. But as long as I believe if you focus on climate and culture, because the sense of belonging is important, and students feeling safe and feeling well, and staff as well, feeling good about the space that they're in, that's half of the battle. It does not negate mental health issues and violent acts, but I think it will mitigate, and it allows you as a leader to lead in love, to lead well, because if you're thinking about the culture and climate, how do you neglect yourself as a leader? And I know that was mentioned, but leaders have to be fit to lead so that it trickles down to the entire school community. So I do believe, even with the tragic situation that happened, I'm still a believer in this work, and that love rules, and it will. And I think we cannot, there's no profile for violence. We used to think that a school shooter, the profile was a trench jacket, weird kid, isolation, and my school showed differently. And so we need to show all kids love and do our very best in accepting who they are, what they bring to us, and show up as human beings. And that's the best that we can do.
Absolutely. And then when something happens, we show up in that same way with that empathy, that compassion, that support, and that love, to be able to guide them through. Absolutely. Well, I want to thank all of you for being here and for your passion. There's lots of other questions that we have that we want to get through, but we will continue to do the work together and revisit all of the work that you're doing. Thank you also to our audience for being here, for the icons that you're sending up the side. And we're going to go ahead and log off for today. We appreciate you and hope you all have a wonderful rest of the day. And please remember to fill out that feedback form for us so that we can continue to create good content for you. Take care.